In this video, I'm going to talk to you about imaginary numbers and how imaginary numbers are a completely separate group from real numbers. They're exactly what they say they are made up. They are imaginary. And it's how we deal with taking the square root of a negative number. So what I want to show you is, I don't have my school calculator with me, but I have a couple calculators that I'll show you what it looks like. But on your cell phone, if you turn it to the side, and you can get this, we want the calculator where you can see the square root. So if I take and I put the square root of 36, watch how it gives me the answer 6. But now look and see what happens when there is a negative inside. Not outside like we did here, but inside of your radical sign. Okay, so let me clear this out. And if I do the square root with a negative inside, notice how this calculator gets confused. I'm hitting enter equals and it won't do anything, and that's because it's creating some kind of error. Now, if you don't have that calculator and you have even an older one like this, look how cool this guy is. If I type in the number 36 and I hit my square root button, I get the number 6. But now watch. If I type in the number 36 and I make it negative, and now I hit that square root symbol, notice how the E comes up. That means error. On most of the calculators you'll probably be using with school, it will actually say like domain error, like user error, and that means that there is no answer. And so what mathematicians have done to kind of deal with it is to give it its own category of numbers called imaginary, and this is how we describe them. An imaginary number is a number that is expressed in terms of a square root, so notice that square root symbol, and a negative inside. Usually we start with 1, just because 1 is an easy number, and we call the unit, the square root of -1, the imaginary unit. So watch what we're going to do, and I'm going to give you only perfect squares to start to make it easy. What is the square root of 4? I think you guys know these squares. Big squares. So what number times itself makes 4? That number, but it's an imaginary 2, because if I were to type this into my calculator, it would say there is no actual answer. The square root of 9, but the negative is inside of the root, is an imaginary number. The square root of 9 is 3, but because that negative is inside, I have to call it an imaginary 3. And the same thing with the square root of 16. The square root of 16 would be 4, but because it's negative, it's an imaginary 4. And so on. So this is imaginary 5 squared, 6 squared, 7 squared, 8 squared, 9 squared. Now I skipped 10 because 10 would be 100, right? Square root of 100. That would be imaginary 10. 121 is 11. Do you know what this one is? You can't use your calculator unless you took the negative out, but the square root of 225, I believe, is 15. Let's double check. Okay, square root of 225, 15. Now, because there's a negative on the inside, I want to make sure that I label mine as an imaginary. Now, the last thing I'm going to do for you is give you a mini challenge to order these from least to greatest. And what I'm going to do is start with a number line. I'm just going to make it really big. And now what I'm going to do is get the decimal for all of these, place them on the number line, and then it'll be really easy to order them from least to greatest. Okay, so the negative of the fraction, let me clear this out. Negative 1 divided by 6 is the decimal negative 1.6 repeating. 0.16 repeating. Then I have the decimal negative 0.3. The square root of 1, I hope you don't need your calculator for that, is exactly 1. Negative 2 divided by 3 is the decimal negative 0.6 repeating. And then the fraction 7 divided by 8 is the decimal 0.875. So if I start labeling these, Negative 0.16 is just a little bit going down between 0 and 1. So if I could think about splitting that into 10 units and then, you know, almost 2. So that's my negative 1/6. Negative 0.3 is bigger than that in the negative direction. The square root of 1 is 1. Negative 2/3 is closer to negative 1 than 0.3. And 0.875 is pretty close to 1, but not quite. That was 7/8. And now what I can do is see in order from least to greatest, it should go negative 2/3, then negative 0.3, then negative 1/6, then positive 7/8, and then 1.